When your best friend becomes your husband's favorite secret, you don't lose them all at once. You lose them in whispers, in texts you're not copied on, in laughter that stops when you walk into the room. At first, I thought I was paranoid, but when I asked for honesty, and they both stayed silent, I realized something. Peace can sound a lot like revenge when it finally gets quiet. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd have to choose between a lifelong friendship and my marriage. I used to believe that once someone earned your trust, that bond could survive anything. But when the people closest to you begin speaking in half-truths and private messages, the ground beneath you shifts slowly until one day it gives out completely. My name's Emily. I've been married for 5 years, and for over a decade, I had a best friend named Sarah. She wasn't just my friend, she was the kind of person I imagined standing beside me at every major life milestone. We laughed through college breakups, survived job losses, helped each other move apartments in the rain, shared ramen when we couldn't afford takeout. And yet, a few months ago, I watched that entire foundation crack. Not because of one catastrophic betrayal, but because of something far more corrosive. Constant little dismissals, quiet emotional trespasses, and a growing intimacy between her and my husband that I could feel, even if I couldn't prove. It started with texts, then memes, then hours-long conversations about topics I wasn't even looped into anymore. I kept wondering, why did she feel more connected to him than me? Why did my husband light up at her name while going silent when I asked simple questions? At first, I tried to brush it off, jealousy maybe, insecurity. But there's a moment when your instincts stop whispering and start screaming. And when I finally confronted it, when I asked them both for honesty, I didn't get clarity, I got blocked. We were more like sisters than friends, not in the cliché way, but in the kind that made other people fade into background noise. We had matching scars from a night we climbed a locked pool fence and nearly got caught. We had a playlist for heartbreaks, a list of stupid promises we made in our dorm, like we'd live in the same city forever, raise our kids like cousins, never let anyone come between us. She knew every version of me, the broke student with ramen packets in her purse, the newly engaged woman terrified of turning into her mother, the friend who'd call at 2 a.m. just to ask if life ever stops feeling like survival. I didn't just love Sarah, I trusted her in the way you only trust someone who's seen you unmade and didn't flinch. Which is why later, when everything between us started to twist, it didn't feel like losing a friend. It felt like losing proof that loyalty could last. When I got engaged to my now husband, Michael, she was one of the first people I told. After college, we stumbled through our 20s side by side, broke, ambitious, terrified, and convinced we were doing adulthood wrong. When I didn't get the job I thought would change everything, Sarah showed up at my apartment with takeout and 2 bottles of cheap wine. She didn't try to cheer me up. She just sat on the floor beside me, matching my silence bite for bite, until laughter finally snuck its way in. A few months later, when she forgot to pay rent and risked losing her apartment, I lent her half my savings without hesitation. We joked about being each other's safety net. 2 parachutes stitched together with caffeine and bad decisions. There were fights too, but never long ones. The kind that started in exhaustion and ended in apology. Once, we stopped talking for a week because she bailed on a trip we'd planned, but she showed up at my door with coffee and a handmade card that said, "Still my person?" in sloppy marker. I remember thinking there was nothing we couldn't fix. Looking back, those years felt golden, though they weren't easy. It wasn't the parties or the milestones that defined us. It was the ordinary loyalty, the unspoken promise that no matter what changed, we wouldn't. That's what made everything that followed so hard to understand. I didn't just lose a friend, I lost the person who taught me what friendship was supposed to mean. She squealed, hugged me, offered to help with the planning. She even joked, "If he ever hurts you, I'll flatten his tires." We laughed, and I believed her. After we got married, life got busier. Sarah moved across town and started a new job, and we didn't see each other as often. Still, she stayed in my life, texts, the occasional coffee date, voice notes about her boss or her dating disasters. It wasn't always consistent, but I trusted the foundation. Sarah and Michael were friendly from the beginning. They got along well, similar sense of humor, both into video games, fitness junkies. When she came over, they'd often end up in the kitchen talking about the latest game updates or swapping workout tips while I set the table or poured wine. I thought nothing of it. I liked that my friend and my husband were comfortable with each other. Eventually, Sarah joined the same gym Michael did. It made sense. They lived closer to each other than either of them lived to me. She mentioned it casually one day, like it wasn't a big deal. And I nodded, told her that was great, because it was, until it wasn't. Things shifted slowly. Their inside jokes started leaving me out. She texted him more than she texted me. I'd see his phone light up with her name during dinner, and he'd chuckle quietly, typing replies without sharing. I'd ask what was funny. "Just Sarah," he'd say, smiling to himself. There were no secrets, not yet, but there was something else, intimacy. Not physical, not romantic maybe, but something deep enough that I felt like a guest in my own relationship. I told myself I was imagining it. Sarah was my friend, Michael was my husband. I was just sensitive, tired, overthinking. I'd scroll back through our old messages, Sarah and me, full of warmth and shared dreams. That girl wouldn't hurt me. That girl knew better. But somewhere between college and now, that girl had changed. Or maybe I had. The first time I truly felt it, that twist in my gut, was during a lazy Saturday morning. Michael was making coffee, and I was scrolling through social media. I glanced at his phone sitting beside him on the counter. It lit up. "Sarah, you'd look ridiculous in that tank top. Wear it anyway." Something in me paused. It wasn't flirtatious, it wasn't graphic, but it was familiar, intimate in a way that made me feel like an outsider. I didn't say anything right away. I just logged it, quietly. The next day, she messaged me for the first time in weeks, a meme I had already seen 2 days prior, on Michael's phone. That was when the shift became hard to ignore. I started noticing how often she reached out to him. Daily texts, voice notes, gym selfies, inside jokes about workouts I knew nothing about. When I'd bring her up in conversation, he'd sometimes glance at his phone, smirking slightly, as if recalling some private joke. But what hurt more was how little she reached out to me. If I messaged, she might respond, hours or days later. If I suggested a meetup, she was always swamped or in need of a recharge weekend. It began to feel like I was being quietly phased out. I started keeping track of the small things, not because I wanted proof, but because I needed to remember that I wasn't imagining it. Her name showed up everywhere, in places it shouldn't. On Michael's playlist suggestions, in a comment thread on a post I hadn't even seen, in photos from the gym where she stood in the background, blurred, but always near him. I stopped checking her page for a while. Every photo felt like a test I was failing. New clothes, new hair, new inside jokes buried in captions that only they seemed to understand. She posted a quote once that said, "Real connections don't need permission." I stared at it for 10 minutes, wondering if it was meant for me. At work, I tried to act normal, answered emails, sat in meetings, pretended I didn't hear the phantom buzz of a phone that wasn't mine. But that sound, that sharp vibration, followed me everywhere. Even when it was silent, my body still flinched for it, like I'd been trained to react to her name. One afternoon, a mutual friend mentioned seeing Sarah at a new cafe. "With someone," she said, hesitant, like the rest of the sentence might hurt me. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't matter, pretending it didn't feel like I was the one being replaced. Nights were the worst. I'd scroll back through old messages between us, her voice notes, her late-night advice, the ridiculous selfies she used to send when she was drunk. The thread was long, full of warmth, proof of years that suddenly felt fictional. But then I'd scroll a little further and find the point where it started thinning out. The tone shifted. The frequency faded. One-word replies. Weeks of silence. I used to think love faded in big, dramatic collapses, screaming matches, betrayals with headlines. But now I know it dies like this, in small, unacknowledged absences, in the sound of laughter coming from another room that you're not invited into. I tried to tell myself that friendships change, that people grow apart, but the truth was simpler and crueler. She hadn't grown away. She'd moved on, and she'd taken part of my life with her. In the days after, Michael acted like nothing had changed. He still laughed at his phone, still replied to her messages like they were harmless. When I finally told him it was hurting me, watching him stay close to someone who'd erased me, he just sighed. "You're overreacting," he said. "She's still my friend." That was the moment I stopped trying to explain. Because I realized it wasn't about Sarah anymore. It was about how easily people excuse betrayal when it isn't happening to them. His silence wasn't cruelty, it was cowardice. And somehow that hurt almost as much as her choice to walk away. The house felt quieter after that, not peaceful, just hollow. Every sound reminded me who wasn't speaking anymore. One night, I found myself staring at our wedding photo. We looked so happy, young, trusting. Sarah had been at that wedding. She was in the front row. Now she was everywhere in our home, just not physically. Her voice on his phone, her name on his screen, her presence in his smile, but not in my life, not in my corner. I didn't want to give him an ultimatum. I didn't want to be the woman who says her or me. But I also knew, deep in my gut, that silence was no longer an option. He asked me one night why I couldn't just move on, why I had to keep dragging Sarah into everything, and I finally told him the truth. Because I need to know that you choose me when it matters. That when someone disrespects me, you don't just shrug and say, "Well, she's still my friend." I need to know that I'm safe with you. His face softened then, just for a moment. But instead of answering, he turned back to his phone. I didn't need to ask who he was texting. That was the moment I knew. Betrayal doesn't always come with lies. Sometimes it comes with silence and the sound of no one choosing you. The breaking point didn't arrive in a dramatic fight or a slammed door. It came quietly, one morning sitting in the kitchen, watching Michael laugh at his phone while eating toast. He didn't even notice me staring. something inside me stilled. It was like standing in the center of a storm that had already passed. No more arguing, no more begging to be seen. Just a calm, numbing clarity. I couldn't do this anymore. I wasn't angry. I was empty. I had spent months trying to explain, to plead, to keep the threads of my friendship and my marriage from unraveling. And in return, I had been dismissed, ignored, blocked, and blamed. I realized that I had made space for everyone's feelings except my own. I had let Sarah dictate the emotional terms of our friendship. I had let Michael gaslight my pain into inconvenience. I had doubted my instincts, questioned my worth, and shrunk myself to keep the peace. And what had it earned me? Loneliness, silence, and a house where my presence was treated like background noise. That morning, I got dressed, grabbed my bag, and walked out. I didn't leave forever. I just needed air, space, proof that I could step away and still exist. I checked into a small hotel near my office. I didn't even tell him until hours later. I texted simply, "I need time." He didn't respond for a full day. When he finally did, all he said was, "Let me know when you're ready to talk." It told me everything I needed to know. There was no apology, no accountability, just another gentle deflection, like all this was a disagreement, not a rupture. I started therapy the following week. I walked into that office shaking, unsure of what I even wanted. I didn't say, "Fix my marriage." I said, "Help me find myself again." The first session was harder than I expected. My therapist asked what brought me there, and I froze. Not because I didn't know, but because it felt ridiculous to say out loud, "My best friend broke my heart." I watched her face, waiting for the confusion, the polite nod people give when they don't understand that a friendship can gut you deeper than a breakup. But she just said, "Tell me about her." I talked about Sarah, how she used to threaten to flatten any man's tires who hurt me, how I used to think that kind of loyalty could survive anything. My therapist smiled softly. "That joke meant you trusted her to protect you," she said. "When that kind of person turns away, it doesn't just break trust, it rewrites safety." The words landed heavy. Rewrites safety. Because that's exactly what it felt like my compass had been quietly flipped, and I'd been walking toward people who didn't see me for miles. She asked if I'd ever noticed a pattern, choosing people I could take care of instead of people who would take care of me. And there it was, the truth I'd been circling for months. I wasn't just mourning Sarah, I was mourning every version of myself that kept trying to earn peace by keeping everyone else comfortable. And slowly I did. Therapy wasn't a miracle. It was slow, messy, uncomfortable, but it was mine. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes after devastation, like walking barefoot on glass, realizing it can't cut you anymore, because you've already bled all you can. For the first time in months, I started noticing small things again. How the morning light hit the wall, the smell of coffee, the sound of my own breathing not being drowned out by someone else's laughter. It wasn't happiness yet, it was survival, soft, steady, mine. I remember sitting in that therapy room one afternoon when my therapist asked, "When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" I couldn't answer. That silence told me everything. That's when I decided to start rebuilding. Not my marriage, not my friendship, but the version of myself I'd neglected while trying to be everyone's peace but my own. I stopped trying to explain the situation to people who didn't want to understand it. I stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations with Sarah or Michael in my head, hoping for a version where they'd suddenly say all the right things. Instead, I focused inward. I grieved the friendship, truly grieved it. Sarah had been a part of me for so long that losing her felt like amputating a limb. But I came to accept that the version of her I missed, the loyal, fiercely protective friend, hadn't existed for a long time. I learned to set boundaries, not just with other people, but with my own guilt. I stopped feeling bad for wanting to be respected in my own home, for needing emotional fidelity as much as physical loyalty, for expecting my husband to take my side when I was mistreated. To his credit, he stopped mentioning her name, but by then it didn't matter, because this was never really about him. It was about Sarah, the girl who once swore she'd flatten a man's tires if he ever hurt me, then turned around and handed him the keys. Her silence cut deeper than any affair could have, because she knew me. She knew my fears, my soft spots, my history, and she used that knowledge to disappear without looking back. For weeks, I kept waiting for her name to show up somewhere. A message, a letter, a ghost trying to undo the damage. But nothing came. And that's when I realized her silence wasn't punishment, it was proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined the betrayal. Proof that she couldn't face what she'd done. Losing her hurt more than losing my trust in him. Because she had been the witness to my whole life, and now she was gone. But maybe that's what peace really is. The moment you stop waiting for an apology from someone who already knows they owe you one. A few nights later, I opened a blank email I knew I'd never send. I typed her name in the to field and just stared at it, those 5 letters that once meant home. I wrote, "I don't hate you. I just wish you'd told me the truth while I still believed you could. We were supposed to grow old, laughing about how naive we were, not become proof that trust can rot quietly. I hope you're okay, not because you deserve my kindness, but because I deserve to stop carrying this anger." I hovered over send for a long time, then deleted her name and saved it as a draft. It wasn't closure. It was something smaller, steadier. The proof that I could still speak her name without breaking. I still think about her sometimes, the version of her from that old dorm. The one who swore we'd always have each other's backs. I don't hate her anymore. I just finally understand that not everyone is meant to grow with you. Some people are just meant to show you where you end. And maybe that's the quietest kind of revenge, rebuilding a life she'll never be invited back into. I rebuilt routines that made me feel whole. One night, months later, I woke up from a dream where we were all still friends, laughing in the kitchen the way it used to be. For a few seconds after waking, I almost reached for my phone to text her. Then I stopped, because I realized I didn't miss them anymore. I missed who I was when I still believed people like that couldn't hurt me. And in that realization, something inside me finally exhaled. It wasn't forgiveness, it was release. The quiet acceptance that not every story needs closure to end. As for Sarah, she never reached out, not once. And oddly, that brought peace. It meant I wasn't crazy. I hadn't misunderstood. Her silence confirmed everything her words had tried to deny. Losing her hurt. But losing myself to keep her would have hurt more. When I finally stopped searching for their names in every silence, the world didn't feel empty anymore. It felt open. Peace didn't roar in like justice. It arrived quietly, like air after smoke, like a room finally cleared of echoes. Maybe that's the real revenge. Not making them see what they lost, but learning to exist without needing to be seen at all. Somewhere, in another version of my life, we're still laughing under those cafe lights. But here, now, I'm walking forward, and the quiet follows like a promise, not a wound. If you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of someone else's choices, you already know where the next story begins.